And then if you wanted to go ahead and make this a 3D object, it's really actually very simple. You just go over here, and these are called switches. And for this particular layer, I can turn on, see this little box, and if I hover it, it tells me it's a 3D layer, allows this layer to be manipulated in 3 dimensions. I can just click right there, and all of a sudden, it turns it into a 3D layer. And a few things that you may not notice that actually happened. One is that it automatically added some things down here for me under the manipulatable keyframeable things like material objects. There's some geometry options. I would have to change the renderer to mess with geometry. I'm not going to do that. And the other thing is in the transform space, I have more transform options now. I can transform on the X rotational axis, the Y rotational axis, the Z rotational axis. Remember, X is horizontal, Y is vertical, Z is depth, so it would be front and back, right? And the other thing that you might not have noticed is right here, it gave me a 3-dimensional set of handles that I can manipulate and move around as well. Which is pretty cool, right? So like if I wanted to grab the Z axis, right here, if I hover over it, you see that it says Z, and it's actually the arrow that I can't see because it's pointing directly at me. It would be like the, anyway, yeah, the Z axis. And then this one you see is the X. It's the red handle. The green handle is the Y axis. And if you hover them, you can see. So if I were to hover over the Z axis and I pull it to the left, it gets smaller because it's getting further away. If I pull it towards me, I'm moving it towards the right. And so you can see that that's changing that. And if I were to look at my transform options, you can see under position, it changed. It gave me a third axis here. No longer did I just have X and Y, I also have Z, and it just went negative 65.9, right? But let's change that back to 0 so that it just resets. The other thing I wanted to show you how to do, and it'll be easier if this is just reset back to its original values, is I want to show you how you can rotate in 3-dimensional space too. So to do that really easily, if I take this rotation tool here, I can click up here, and then if I see how the cursor has a little rotation symbol next to it, if I grab it and I start to turn like this, I can turn it on its axis, and right now I have free kind of like free wheel ability to change it. And you'll notice as I am doing this, down in the orientation, you can see the values are all changing, right? So if you wanted to figure out how to easily just change it in one direction, first of all, I'm going to undo this, okay? If you want to figure out how to change it one direction, you can grab a specific handle and you can do it that way. So if I grab the red handle, it's going to turn it on the x-axis. So on the horizontal axis, it's going to make that the rotational axis, right? I'll undo that. If I change it on the z-axis, right? The z-axis is what goes forwards and backwards, right? So it's changing it so that it rotates in a circle, right? We don't want that either. If I grab the green handle, the green is the Y, and so that's the axis that we actually probably might want to make a change with, right? And so if I do something like this, it would spin back to 0 like that direction. Or if I do this, I'd probably start at like 270. You can see how it's making changes down below in the orientation, right? And so this might be the direction that I'd want it to spin. So I'm going to undo that. And what I can do to have more control over this is in the orientation is that I can just change and type a value right here. So this was the y-axis, this middle value. So, and I could see that when I was typing. So if I do 270, it looks like it disappears, but that's because it flipped 270 degrees. And now if I wanted to have it keyframe and change, I could come out some number of seconds, later. Let's say maybe, I don't know, somewhere like around here, right? And then I can add a keyframe like maybe here. So let's go ahead and do that. Where it says orientation, I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to click the keyframe button in this left column. Okay, and so now I've got two keyframes, and I can scrub and zoom in a little bit on this timeline. See this option where it lets me zoom in, and I can get more detail down here in the timeline. So now if I take my playback head and I jump to the next keyframe, and then I select that keyframe, I can change this value back to 0. And what it'll do is it'll create the in-between frames. So you'll see here that it's making this animation for me, which is kind of great. So let me just hit the play back, right? Oops, let me start from the beginning. All right, and that's okay. It's fine. But if I want something maybe a little bit more dramatic, like something is just sort of flying into the frame, the way that these guys are moving. So if you'll notice that these guys are kind of like swinging really, really severely into the foreground right here. So what if we start here severely in the foreground and swing out so that then this guy's swinging back in, right? So what I can do is, let's just take a moment here and let's just do like the playback head somewhere in between so that we can at least see the thing that says Spire, and that way you'll get an idea of kind of what I'm talking about. And so the thing that I could do for position now that it's a 3D object is I'm going to take my arrow tool, again, my selection tool, so that I'm not doing rotation anymore. And for position, I'm going to take the z-axis, right? It's this last one. Remember, it goes x, y, and then z, right? And so x is side to side, y is up and down, and z is, you know, front to back. And so let's say if I were to do this, that makes it disappear. Like if I increase the value, it pushes it further back in the distance. If I pull this value to the left though, right, and I make it so that it's coming out from like basically our point of view, like so from where we're, you know, where we are as a viewer, almost as if we're there, I can make this go back to a really, really severe negative value. And you'll see as let's pull this back in, you'll see that as it comes in, right, it would be really big, and I can make it start off like some really huge negative number, and then it can go back down to the normal size that it was, right? So to do that, I want to make sure here, let's get really close to the starting frame. I want to make sure that it's so big that it's actually like, you know, going to be close to being off the screen, you know, whenever it gets started, it would, and then it would just sort of feel like it was flying in, right? So somewhere in here is probably pretty good. And you'll notice that if you look at this value, it's like negative 886, you know, units of measure, right? So it's pretty significant. So let's just leave that there, right? And that'll be the natural state because I haven't actually set a keyframe for position. That's why it's just big the whole way. And the animation that you're seeing is just the rotation animation. So we need to change a position animation so that it goes from negative 886 to 0. And let's do it so that it matches up with this other keyframe. So if I hold down Shift, it'll jump to the keyframe for orientation. But what I want to do is I want to create a keyframe for the position instead, right? So if I click on the stopwatch, it creates a keyframe. Now I'll go back to the beginning. I will add another keyframe, right? And so now what I want to do is I want to actually change. Let's go put our playback head in the right place. At the you'll see the marker at the 20. I guess it's milliseconds. At that point, then I will select that keyframe for position, and instead of negative 886, I'm just going to select that and I'm going to type 0 because that's what the original size was, right? And so if we look at this and now we hit the space bar and we can see that animation, I think that I like the way that that kind of spins in, and then these guys will spin back out, right? And it's sort of like an exchange that's happening. And so I think that I'm pretty good with that portion of the animation.